But first, the Prime Minister says he's now focused on securing a face-to-face meeting with President Donald Trump following his 6-day trip to China. Should have been his focus from day one, but there we are. And more than just a meeting, in an interview with The Australian out today, the Prime Minister says he's vowed to draw clear lines for the meeting on the limits of the nation's partnership. Joining me now to discuss what this means, former Army Director General, Retired Brigadier Ian Langford. Ian, thank you for your time. I mean, what do you make of this idea of clear lines on the limits of our partnership? I mean, how do you read this? Because if you take the Prime Minister literally, is he looking to rewrite the ANZUS Treaty?
Well, it's really interesting, Peter. Thanks for having me on. On one hand, we have this real strategic contemplation around his 6-day visit. High-level delegations would have gone into significant preparation and planning for those key leader engagements in Beijing. I contrast that to the more reactive approach that we're seeing now as it relates to the Prime Minister's visit or attempt to achieve an office call with the President. And so you can see on one hand a real strategic play in terms of how we engage with China, and we see on the other a much more reactive, a much more constraining and potentially conflict style as it relates to the US. I mean, part of this comment around red lines really pertains to the domestic agenda here. It's been very popular for the Prime Minister to be critical of the President. There's obviously a dimension here around things like the pharmaceutical benefit scheme and him wanting to protect that. But really, when you think about our security guarantor, the relationship between Australia and the US, and most acutely between our two key leaders, is what underscores ANZUS in execution. It what underwrites Australia's national security, and it really does give focus and provide, if you like, a North Star around how we design policy, how we resource our national security, and how we achieve a mandate with the Australian people to keep them safe.
Yeah, you're right to say he looked incredibly warm over there with the Chinese. He's come home, and the first sort of hit out of the Australian media, it looks like with those comments regarding President Trump that he's performing for Beijing. You know, that he said something behind closed doors, I'll make it clear when I get back to Australia, and he's doing just that. And also over the weekend, you know, not a lot out of that visit. 6 days, big time for a PM, was concrete. And that was the general view of most of the commentariat. And do you think that's a fair criticism?
I think it is. I mean, we've had apples, we've had tourism, and they are worthy in their own right. But really, in the days since the Prime Minister has completed this activity, I'm looking for what are the enduring dimensions, benefits, what is changing as a result of that high-level engagement. And again, we think we understand that we've had some key leader and relationship resets with the Chinese leadership, but that can't obviously come at a cost in terms of how we balance overall both our security and our economic relationships with the two countries that will have the most deterministic effect on our future for, you know, the rest of our lives. So it's one thing to achieve some small gains. It's another to declare a relationship reset. We really didn't achieve any acknowledgement from the Chinese as it relates to things that concern us, to include some of that maritime aggression we saw off the East Coast some months ago. We haven't had a clear explanation on the purpose around military expansion in the way that we're seeing the People's Liberation Army really rival the US now in the Western Pacific and in East and North Asia. I mean, China have doubled their nuclear arsenal since 2020, and the explanation for doing that is not clear. So they're the big strategic issues that a country like Australia, a middle power who is in a military alliance with the United States, really want to understand from these visits so that we can chart a way forward. Because really, if you listen to the pundits and the experts, the period we're moving into now demands more Australian statecraft, demands more expertise and more real agility in terms of how we manage our economic and our security relationships.
I won't get into sort of the failure of the Prime Minister to discuss the Port of Darwin, but clearly that involvement with a Chinese company should put us all on notice. So I think, you know, we've got to say we're shocked by the revelations in the Australian that there's a whole lot of companies that are alleged to have links to the Chinese Communist Party buying up land at Port Kembla and Newcastle. Now, we know back in 2013, these two ports were shortlisted for AUKUS. It feels like we're asleep at the wheel here. I mean, is there no one sitting at Russell checking these sort of purchases? There's no one in Parliament House checking these sort of purchases. I presume they've got to go through FIRB in some way, but I mean, this is crazy.
It is. I mean, we have a retrospective experience based on the Port of Darwin. We should be thinking about our defence facilities in terms of the threats they face, be that espionage, be that sabotage, be that passive intelligence collection. And we should be really mindful of who is acquiring land through lease or through purchase, and whether or not they're state-owned and what kind of threat that might represent to that facility. We also know in the US, for example, the US government is now clamping down on Chinese government companies, I should say, that are buying land in and around US Air Force facilities. It's certainly part of, I think, a deliberate campaign on the part of the Chinese to get close to our defence facilities to increase their capacity to collect intelligence. And when it comes to AUKUS, specifically Pillar 1, the nuclear-powered submarine, there can be no compromise for meeting our security obligations in terms of sharing that platform with the Americans and that technology, but also keeping ourselves safe for what Richard Marles calls the apex predator of our defence capability. So this is really concerning. Foreign Investment Review Board has a part to play here, but so does our leadership and the public discussion around how we keep our facilities secure, not only now, but in the years and decades ahead as these capabilities come online.
Brigadier Langford, thank you.